They say parrots mimic what they hear, but that morning, Captain wasn't just copying sounds. He was screaming. And it wasn't his usual cheeky squawk for attention. It was frantic, sharp, a piercing cry that cut through the thick, smoky air that had settled over the property like a suffocating blanket. My partner Maya and I were already on edge. Bushfire warnings had lit up our phones overnight, but we hadn't expected it to come so close, so fast. We ran outside, thinking Captain had seen flames. But instead, he was perched by the window, staring toward the dense brush behind our neighbor Joan's property. Then we heard it, a faint meow. Desperate, trapped. The cat, Milo, hadn't been seen in days. And now, with fire crawling down the ridge and the wind changing direction, we realized we didn't have time to think. I didn't know it then, but that parrot had just saved a life. The sky that morning was the kind of eerie yellow that makes your stomach tighten before your brain can process why. The smoke had thickened overnight, and even before Captain screamed, I knew we were in for something bad. Maya was already stuffing emergency kits into the car, her face tight with concentration, but her hands steady like they always were in crisis. I grabbed my camera bag out of habit. It's dumb, I know, but some part of me believed that if I could document what was happening, I'd feel more in control. Captain wouldn't stop squawking, pacing along the windowsill like he was trying to drag us outside. That's when we heard it, barely audible over the crackle of distant fire, a meow, thin and shaky. Maya froze. That's Milo. Milo belonged to Joan, our elderly neighbor 2 plots over. Joan had been evacuated the day before. She'd knocked on our door, handed us a key, and said, "If you can get him, but don't risk your lives for a cat." I remember how her voice caught when she said it. Milo was semi-feral, more shadow than pet. No one could really touch him except Joan, and even she did it with gloves most days. I bolted toward the back fence, Maya right behind me, a towel in one hand and an old cat carrier in the other. The smoke was heavier near Joan's place, and the eucalyptus trees popped with small bursts as they heated, like cruel reminders of what was creeping toward us. We entered her yard cautiously. Captain's cries faded behind us. Everything was still, too still. The silence you get when birds vanish and even the wind seems to hold its breath. Joan's back door was unlocked. I stepped in first. "Milo?" I called softly. Maya crouched low, scanning under furniture behind curtains. The smell of scorched air mixed with old books and cat litter. I'd only been inside Joan's house once before. Now it felt like we were trespassing into something sacred. Then I saw him, on top of the fridge, curled in, wide-eyed, body shaking. Milo. But he didn't run. Not this time. He let out a single weak meow. Maya approached slowly, whispering. She tossed the towel gently over him, scooped him like a newborn, and slid him into the carrier. No fight, just fear. Pure, paralyzing fear. We turned to leave, but something made me stop. A flicker in the hallway. Eyes. Another cat, a smaller one, hiding behind a laundry basket. I blinked. I didn't even know Joan had a second cat. "Maya," I said. "There's another one." She looked, cursed softly under her breath. The fire wasn't far now. We had minutes, maybe. That's when we had to make a choice. Grab the known cat and run, or try to save them both and risk getting trapped. I stood frozen, heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to outrun the smoke. The second cat, just a sliver of fur and terrified eyes, was pressed so tightly against the laundry wall it looked like part of the shadows. Its ribs expanded in short, rapid bursts, like it hadn't taken a full breath in days. I didn't know its name. I didn't even know it existed. But in that moment, I knew that leaving it behind would haunt me forever. Behind me, Milo whimpered inside the carrier, the towel rising and falling slightly as he trembled. I looked at Maya, and she was already on her knees, inching forward. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, soft and steady, the way she talks to animals that bite. "We've got you." The cat hissed, low and raw, then darted under the cabinet. Damn it, there was no time for coaxing. Outside, the wind picked up, and with it the sharp, dry scent of burning gum tree bark. The sun, filtered through smoke, was now the color of rust. I checked my watch. We had maybe 4 minutes before that ridge fire dropped down into the lower brush. Once it hit the fence line, there'd be no going back. I need something. Food, maybe. Anything that smells like Joan, Maya said quickly. She rummaged through the bedroom drawers, grabbed an old sweater, and placed it gently on the floor near the cabinet's edge. I crouched beside her, trying to slow my breathing. The cat peeked out, its eyes locked with mine for a second. Only a second, but something passed between us. Panic, sure, but also something deeper. Recognition, maybe. That primal knowing when two creatures realize they're both trapped and neither wants to be. I reached forward, holding the sweater near. The cat didn't move. Not forward, not back, just stared. I whispered, "Come on, mate. You don't have to do this alone." It took one step, then another. And when its nose touched the fabric, probably the scent of Joan's hands, her lap, the memory of safety, it gave a tiny cry, just a whisper of sound. Then, against all odds, it crawled into Maya's arms. She didn't wrap it this time. She didn't need to. It let her lift it, trembling the whole way, and she eased it into an old tote bag she'd emptied just in case. We didn't speak after that. We just moved. Back through the hall, down the steps, across the brittle grass of the backyard, where ash had begun to fall like slow-motion snow. We reached our fence line just as the first branch caught flame behind Joan's shed. It cracked with a snap like bone. I turned once, just once, and saw the sky bleed orange behind us. Captain was still screaming when we got to the porch, but this time his voice sounded different. Urgent, yes, but also triumphant, as if he knew what we'd done, as if he'd been waiting for us to come home. The house had shifted, not physically, but in the way it felt, denser, heavier, as if the smoke outside had managed to seep through the walls and anchor itself in our chests. We didn't speak much after returning. The urgency that had carried us through the rescue was now replaced with a thick, nervous quiet. We placed both cats gently in the laundry room, dimmed the light, and let them be. Milo remained tucked into the towel like a frightened child beneath a blanket, unmoving but alive, his eyes wide open and fixed on nothing. The other cat stayed against the far wall, not cowering exactly, but retreating, silent and alert, as if it were calculating what we were, whether we were another threat to escape or something else entirely. Captain had followed us in and taken position on the washing machine, feathers ruffled, his head cocked sideways like he was listening to a frequency none of us could hear. Maya knelt near the smaller cat and studied it closely, not with the urgency of the rescue, but with something deeper, a quiet examination, a suspicion taking form. Her fingers traced the edge of the cat's ear, then paused. "This notch," she murmured, almost to herself. "That's from a trap-neuter return. This cat's been tagged." She looked up at me, eyes narrowed in thought. "Liam, this isn't Milo's sibling. It's not from Joan's house." Her voice held something strange now, an edge of confusion, maybe even dread. I crouched beside her and tried to connect the dots, but they kept slipping away. Then, from above us, Captain shifted his weight, fluffed his feathers, and uttered something that stopped every thought in its tracks. In Joan's voice, clear, unmistakable, he said, "Don't tell them everything." The words dropped into the room like a stone through glass. Neither of us moved. Captain laughed then, that bizarre, metallic laugh he'd picked up years ago and used like punctuation, more slowly, more clearly. "Don't tell them everything." The cold that climbed my spine wasn't from the smoke. It was something else entirely, something older, like instinct. My mind began to stitch together the things I'd ignored. The oversized bags of dry food delivered to Joan's porch when she lived alone, the strange chemical scent that sometimes drifted over the fence on hot days, the way she always walked into the brush at twilight with a tote bag slung over her shoulder and came back lighter, distracted, distant. I stood up slowly and walked over to the key she'd left us, still resting where I'd tossed it on the counter. Without saying a word to Maya, I took it and stepped back outside, into the dull, orange-hazed world. Joan's shed sat crooked at the far end of her property, half swallowed by overgrown shrubs and leaning trees blackened at the tips by ash. The lock gave way with a reluctant click, and as the door swung open, the smell hit me first. Pungent, layered, unmistakable. Old urine, wet wood, sour fur. The interior was dim and close, airless, the walls lined with makeshift bedding, overturned crates, empty food tins, and soft piles of blankets turned brittle with time. And then, movement, slight, skittish, buried in the shadows. Eyes gleamed back at me in pairs. One cat slunk behind a crate, its fur patchy and dull. Another limped awkwardly across a pile of shredded newspaper. A third let out a low, defeated growl. This wasn't a rescue center. It wasn't a hoarder's chaos either. It was something stranger. It was secret. deliberate, a collection of lives hidden away just beyond sight. And Joan, sweet, weathered, soft-spoken Joan, had known exactly what she was doing. As the fire cracked in the distance and the sky continued to bleed into shades of ember and soot, I shut the shed door and locked it behind me, not to forget what I'd seen, but because I wasn't ready to explain it. Back inside, Maya looked up as I stepped through the door. I sat heavily on the floor beside her, and Captain, still watching from above, murmured the words one last time, soft as breath. "Don't tell them everything." And I knew then, I couldn't. Maya didn't ask right away. She just sat there on the laundry room floor, her arms loosely around her knees, watching the cats like they held answers she couldn't quite phrase into words. The room was thick with the sounds of breathing, mine, hers, the shallow rasps from Milo, and the quiet rhythm of the other cat's tremors. Captain, for once, was silent, his feathers flat, his eyes still and knowing. The words he'd spoken hung in the air like invisible dust, too heavy to stir, too delicate to shatter. Finally, she looked at me. "How many?" Her voice didn't crack, but it had softened, as if she was bracing for a truth she'd already imagined in full. "4," I said. That I could see. Maya nodded once, slow and precise, the way she did when she was aligning pieces in her head. She was hiding them. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even blame, just a fact laid bare on the tile between us. But there was something else in it too. Something I couldn't name at first. Not anger. Not disappointment. Grief, maybe. Or betrayal. That quiet kind that sneaks in through the back door and sits with you without speaking. I leaned back against the cabinet and stared at the water bowl. The smaller cat, her I'd decided, had finally crept forward to sniff it, though she flinched at every sound like she expected someone to yell. Milo hadn't moved from his corner, but I could feel his tension beginning to fade, like the smallest thread was unwinding inside him now that the fire had passed. "What do we do now?" I asked, though I already knew the question wasn't really aimed at her. It was for me, for the quiet, for the part of me that couldn't stop picturing Joan's lined hands smoothing down fur, her voice as she'd handed me the key. "Don't risk your lives for a cat." Maya didn't answer at first. She stood, brushed dust from her jeans, and walked out of the room. I stayed. A minute passed. 2. The light through the window shifted and caught the edge of the carrier, making the towel glow like it was lit from within. Captain rustled his wings and let out a soft chirp. Not a scream, not a word. Just presence. When Maya came back, she had a clipboard from her clinic bag and a pen. She knelt and began scribbling notes, observations, behavior, condition, intake. She didn't say anything, but I knew what she was doing. She was making a plan, doing what she always did when the world tilted. She anchored it. "We'll need to get them all out. The others too," she said finally. "Find a way to move them safely. Assess if they're adoptable. But first, we have to make sure they're okay. These two. Right now." I nodded, but something inside me bristled, not against her, but against the rising tide of responsibility. This wasn't what I'd planned. I took photos of wild animals from a distance. I wasn't supposed to be deciding their futures up close. But the truth was, we already had. The next morning arrived with that brittle stillness that only follows catastrophe, the kind where birds don't sing yet, and the light feels filtered, like it's passing through the memory of something burned. Ash had settled over everything outside like gray snow, soft and deceptive. You couldn't see the scorch line from our yard, but you could smell it in the wind. Charcoal and melted sap mingled with the faint scent of singed fur. Maya had barely slept. Neither had I. The cats hadn't made a sound, not a single one, but their presence had shifted the rhythm of the house. It felt like hosting ghosts that hadn't decided whether to stay or leave. Maya had already called in a favor from a colleague at the clinic, asking about temporary cages, emergency meds, trauma signs. The plan, if we could call it that, was still forming. But then a knock came at the door, sharp and hurried. When I opened it, Ash stood there in his yellow volunteer firefighter jacket, streaked with soot and half-zipped like he'd thrown it on while moving. His face looked like it had aged 10 years overnight. "They're sweeping properties for flare-ups," he said without preamble. "One flare and the whole ridge could light again. If you've got animals, they need to be accounted for, all of them." Maya came to the door behind me, her hand instinctively resting on the small of my back. "We've got 2. she said carefully. But there may be more at Joan's place. Ash exhaled slowly, looking past us toward the tree line like he could see through it. We don't have time to dance around this. Are they registered? Tagged? Contained? We looked at each other. That pause told him everything. I can buy you 24 hours, he said, quieter now. But if someone else reports them and they're unregistered, animal control gets called in. You know how that ends. I did. So did Maya. Cats picked up in disaster zones without tags were often euthanized within 72 hours. Overcrowded shelters, high risk of disease, limited vet access. It wasn't cruelty, it was math. Cold, merciless math. When Ash left, Maya closed the door slowly behind him, and we both stood in the stillness for a moment longer than necessary. It felt like the fire had passed the torch to something worse: bureaucracy, exposure, judgment. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos of Joan. There were always cats in the frame, often blurry, half hidden, on shelves, windowsills, fence posts. Had we just never looked close enough, or had she deliberately kept us at a distance? And then came the second call. Not from the clinic, not from Ash. From Joan. She'd reached the evacuation center outside town and borrowed a nurse's phone. Her voice, worn and raspy, asked only one question. Did you find the box I left in the shed? I didn't even know there was one. I didn't tell Maya about the call right away. Something about Joan's voice, it had an edge I couldn't place. Not panic, not even desperation. Just distance. As if she was speaking from the far side of a decision already made, and I was only now catching up. I'd scribbled the message down. Did you find the box I left in the shed? And stuffed it into my pocket like a confession I wasn't ready to read aloud. Maya was still deep in triage mode, cataloging every scratch, flinch, and limp from the 2 cats we'd brought in. She had that laser focus she used when something fragile was depending on her to survive, and I couldn't break her rhythm. Not yet. But even as she worked, I could feel something shifting in her. The way she avoided eye contact when she spoke about next steps. The way she lingered by the smaller cat, now curled into a corner of the bathroom we'd turned into a makeshift safe room. She called her Fern, softly, like the name had grown from the cat's silence. It wasn't just care, it was attachment, and I wasn't sure Maya had noticed yet. I, on the other hand, couldn't stop noticing. Every time I passed the carrier where Milo lay, I saw Joan's hands, how gently she'd handled him that day, how tightly she'd gripped the key when she gave it to me. There was a kind of sacredness in her secrecy that I hadn't understood before. Maybe the cats weren't just pets. Maybe they were chapters of something unfinished. Maybe keeping them hidden wasn't just a habit, but a promise, one she couldn't bear to break. And now that promise sat in my house, blinking at me from behind tired eyes. Later that afternoon, Maya finally leaned back against the wall and sighed. We can't keep them all, she said, not accusing, not defeated, just stating it out loud, as if voicing the truth made it more real. Not long term, I nodded slowly. We could foster, find placements, see if any rescues can step in. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up Fern, gently, wrapping her in a towel like it was a ceremony. The cat didn't fight, her tiny head tucked against Maya's arm, purring faintly, rhythmically. And I saw it then. Maya's dilemma wasn't logistical. It wasn't about time or space or resources. It was about letting go. We could keep her, she said quietly, not looking at me. You think Joan would be okay with that? She gave us the key, she replied. That wasn't just about opening a door. And maybe she was right. Maybe the rescue hadn't been a single event, but a passing of something larger. Trust, responsibility, maybe even grief. But with that trust came weight. Every decision we made now, every name we gave, every cat we chose to hold or release, it all echoed further than we could see. And that box Joan mentioned, it still waited, unopened, somewhere behind that shed door. A puzzle piece she'd left behind, and with it perhaps the final say in whether this story was hers or ours. By the time the sun dropped behind the blackened ridge, our yard had taken on an eerie sort of stillness, the kind that makes you wonder if something is watching. The smoke had thinned, but the air still tasted of bark and silence. We hadn't yet gone back to Joan's shed, not because we were avoiding it, but because neither of us had said it was time. The box lingered between us like a forgotten promise. That night, while Maya slept curled on the couch with Fern tucked against her ribs, I stepped outside alone. Captain stayed inside for once, unusually quiet, as if even he sensed the world had tilted and wasn't done spinning yet. I crossed through the yard slowly, flashlight beam flickering across scorched fence posts and half-melted bird feeders. When I reached the shed, the metal latch was warm beneath my fingers, still holding a trace of heat from the day. I opened the door, and the smell hit me again. Feral, musky, raw with tension and survival. The 4 cats were still there. I saw them before they saw me, pressed into their corners, still watching. There was food, barely touched. One had torn a strip of blanket to shreds and now lay curled inside it, like a soldier in a trench. They weren't just hiding, they were waiting. I stepped deeper inside, trying not to breathe too loudly, and that's when I noticed it. Not the box, not yet, but a shallow trench in the dirt floor, covered haphazardly with tarp and gravel. Curiosity pulled me forward. I knelt, peeled the corner back, and found a small plastic crate beneath, taped shut, labeled in thick black marker, "Only if I don't come back." The box. I sat there a moment with it in my lap, listening to the scratch of claws on wood behind me and the wind brushing against the outside walls. I didn't open it right away. The words on top felt like a seal, a curse, something made to outlive its author. Back at the house, I set it on the kitchen table. Maya rubbed sleep from her eyes as I came in, blinking at the shape between us. "That it?" I nodded. She didn't ask what was in it. She just placed her hand over mine. The cats in the other room shifted softly, a rustle of fur against plastic. Then, just as I reached for the tape, my phone buzzed. I looked down, half expecting Ash, but it wasn't him. It was a blocked number. One message. "You don't know what she was doing." No name, no punctuation, just those words. Maya read it over my shoulder, her fingers tensed around mine, and suddenly it wasn't just a question of how many cats Joan had hidden. It was why, and who else knew. We didn't open the box that night. It sat there on the kitchen table, silent and ordinary, yet somehow radiating the same tension as a lit fuse. The message on my phone, "You don't know what she was doing," looped through my head like a low drumbeat, steady and unnerving. I tried tracing the number, but it was masked completely, buried behind some unknown wall. Maya didn't push me to dig deeper. She only said, "Let's give it a day," like we were diffusing something that could go off if handled wrong. That next morning arrived pale and slow, the sky the same low gray as the ash-covered hills. Fern had begun to explore, not boldly, but with the cautious grace of something testing the floor for cracks. She followed Maya's scent like a thread, curling around her ankles, brushing against her legs with the slightest flick of trust. It wasn't affection, not yet. It was memory, recognition of the only thing that hadn't changed. Milo, on the other hand, barely moved. He remained still in the crate with the door propped open, a ghost of himself. His fur, once sleek, now looked matted in places, and though his eyes were open, they didn't seem to see the room. Maya tried coaxing him out with food, with soft murmurs, but he refused all of it, and that refusal, more than anything, told us something else was wrong. She sat with him in silence, her hand resting just inside the crate, not touching him, but close enough for him to feel her presence. And when I looked at her, really looked, I saw the quiet unraveling, the kind that creeps in not from panic, but from care. Maya had always drawn strength from action, bandaging, feeding, cleaning, documenting, but now she was in the space between those things, a space where nothing could be fixed yet. That afternoon, I returned to the shed to check on the others, expecting the same eerie stillness as before. But one of them was missing. 3 cats, not 4. I stood inside, unmoving, listening to the quiet. No sign of struggle, no sign of escape, just gone. I searched the corners, under blankets, even the rafters, but the 4th cat had vanished like smoke. My first instinct was that I'd miscounted, that maybe stress had played tricks on my mind. But then I saw the paw prints, fresh, leading toward a crack in the back corner where the boards had pulled apart from heat. Too small for a dog, just large enough for a desperate cat. I returned home and told Maya. She didn't react immediately, but I could see her doing the math. 1 gone, 3 left, 2 already inside, each one more complicated than the last. And then as dusk settled in, the doorbell rang. It wasn't Ash, it wasn't animal control. It was a woman I didn't recognize. Tall, gray jacket, hair tucked beneath a loose hood. She didn't introduce herself. She only looked at the box on our kitchen table, then at us, and asked, "You haven't opened it yet, have you?" Her voice was calm, almost clinical, but her eyes told a different story. They scanned the room, pausing on Fern as she emerged from the hallway like a wary scout. The woman didn't smile, didn't soften. She didn't want them all to be found, she said, as if it were the most natural sentence in the world. And then she added, almost as an afterthought, some of them were never meant to leave. She didn't give her name, didn't ask to come in either. She simply stood in the doorway like someone delivering bad news to strangers and waited for us to give her permission to ruin whatever peace we thought we had. Maya glanced at me once, just once, but it was enough. I stepped aside, and the woman entered with the quiet confidence of someone who had already decided what part of the story she was in. She walked past Captain, who eyed her with an unusual silence, then paused when she saw the cats. Milo in his crate, unmoving, and Fern, now halfway hidden behind Maya's legs. "I was part of it," she said without ceremony, setting down her satchel like it weighed more than it should have. "Not officially, but I helped Joan when she started pulling from the old hillside colony outside Burlow. That was 3 years ago. They were going to be culled." Her voice didn't tremble, not even in the difficult parts. She spoke like someone testifying to a version of the truth she'd repeated to herself too many times to be unsure. Joan didn't hoard. She kept the ones no one else would take. Injured, aggressive, feral beyond help. Some were sick, some were just wild. There were deals, promises made and broken. Vets who looked the other way. A few of us supported it quietly. We thought we were saving lives. Maya sat down slowly, eyes fixed on the box on the table. "And the others?" she asked. "The ones still in the shed?" The woman nodded, but there was hesitation there now. Not all of them were meant to be released. Some couldn't have survived, but Joan couldn't kill them. She didn't believe in necessary outcomes. That's what she called it, when systems kill because they're overwhelmed. She thought if she kept them hidden, fed, warm, she could wait out the system, outlive the math. I felt the breath drain from my lungs in a slow, aching pull. We hadn't rescued pets. We'd stepped into the middle of a protest disguised as a promise. A private rebellion with fur and claws and names no one else would ever know. "And the message?" I asked. "The one I got on my phone?" The woman hesitated. "That wasn't me, but I know who sent it. There's another, someone Joan clashed with. Used to be in her corner, thought she was crossing lines." At that, Maya stood. Her hands were shaking, just slightly, but her voice was steady. "We need to know what's in the box." The woman looked between us and nodded slowly. "If you open it, you become part of it. You carry it. Not just the cats. The consequences. You won't be able to give them up and walk away." I looked at Maya, and she looked back at me, not asking, not pleading, just waiting. Like she already knew what we were about to decide, and all that was left was saying it out loud. And in that moment, I understood the truth. We were no longer rescuers. We were inheritors. And the choice was no longer about what to do with the cats. It was about whether we were ready to live with the cost of knowing them. The air in the kitchen had thickened with something invisible but unignorable, like humidity right before a storm, heavier than silence, denser than smoke. The box sat on the table between us, its worn plastic corners stained faintly with ash from the shed. The tape across the top weathered like it had been handled too many times by someone who couldn't bring themselves to let it go. The woman, the one who never gave her name, watched it the way someone might look at a loaded gun. Not with fear exactly, but with the respect of someone who knows what it's capable of. I stood at the edge of the table, hands pressed flat to the wood, not because I was bracing for anything, but because I needed something solid beneath me. Something that didn't shift or bleed or disappear. Maya leaned in slowly and began peeling the tape with a kind of reverence, as if she feared the box would vanish if she touched it too quickly. Inside were 3 things. The first was a folded envelope with both our names written across the front in Joan's delicate, looping handwriting, the kind only older people still have, shaped by long-forgotten letters and unwritten etiquette. The second was a stack of worn veterinary documents bound with string. Names, dates, photos, injuries, behavioral notes. Every cat, every story, every refusal of euthanasia. There were even rejection letters from shelters, too aggressive, too sick, too unpredictable. The third thing was a journal, not large, but thick. The kind of notebook someone buys with the intention of documenting everything they're not ready to say aloud. Maya picked it up first, flipping carefully through the pages, eyes scanning the spidery ink, her lips moving silently as she read. Then she stopped and handed it to me. Page after page revealed not chaos, but calculation. Joan had known exactly what she was doing. Her entries were methodical, laced with emotion but never uncontrolled. She'd tracked the cat's moods, relapses, moments of sudden trust. She'd grieved their setbacks, celebrated every paw step forward. Some pages ended mid-sentence. Others circled back to earlier thoughts, rewriting decisions that clearly haunted her. And scattered throughout the text were phrases that felt addressed not to herself, but to someone else, to us. Milo will stay with you if he learns your voice. Fern is clever. She hides when she's ready to be seen. If you're reading this, then I must have trusted you more than I knew how to say. I looked up at Maya. Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. Not yet. She was building something, she said softly. Not a shelter, not a home, something in between, a holding space for the ones who didn't fit into either. I nodded, and that's when the confrontation began. Not with Joan, not with the woman who stood watching us silently, but with ourselves. Could we do this? Not just for a week or two. Not just until the fire danger passed, but for real. Could we take these fractured, half-wild souls and carry them across whatever threshold Joan had hoped someone would cross after her? The woman finally spoke again, voice quiet but firm. You don't have to keep them. No one would blame you. You can hand the book to someone else. Let them figure it out. But Maya was already shaking her head. We're not giving the book away, she said. We just finally started reading it. That night, we didn't speak much. The journal lay open between us on the couch, its spine splayed like a wound, pages half-folded, filled with the quiet heartbreak of someone who had loved without reward, over and over again. Fern curled beside Maya, pressed close as if she already knew what had been decided, and was simply waiting for the rest of us to catch up. Milo remained near the window, watching the night through the pane like something half here, half remembered. Every once in a while his ears twitched at distant sounds, wind through broken trees, a possum scuttling across the fence, but he never looked back at us. The woman left just before midnight. She didn't take the journal or the box or anything else. She only paused at the door and said, "If you choose to keep going, you'll need help, real help. I can make some calls, but they'll ask questions, and not all of them will care about answers." And then she was gone, swallowed by the dark like a chapter we weren't finished reading but could no longer hold open. The next morning broke colder than expected, a strange shift in the air that made every breath feel like a question. I stood on the back porch with a mug in my hand, watching the early light scrape across the hills, brushing gold over ash. Captain was on the railing beside me, unusually quiet. He stared in the same direction I did, toward Joan's shed, now sagging slightly from days of heat and silence. Maya stepped out behind me, pulled my sweater tighter around her shoulders, and said nothing for a long while. We both knew what the morning meant. The fire patrols would return. Animal services might show up. The time to just decide later was over. "I think we need to bring them in," she said finally, voice low. "One at a time, assess, treat, do it properly." I turned to her. "All of them?" She nodded. "Even the one that ran, if we can find her." And there it was, the moment drawn like a bowstring, taut between guilt and duty. We weren't just making a choice for the animals, we were making one for ourselves, to be altered, inconvenienced, changed. This wasn't charity, it was transformation. I looked around the yard, our life before this. It already felt like another place, another couple, another version of us. There were no more neutral actions. If we said yes, we were becoming the continuation of something that began long before us. If we said no, we were the quiet ending no one wanted to write. Milo moved toward the door just then. No sound, no prompting. Just rose and walked with slow, deliberate steps until he sat beside my leg and looked up. Not in fear, not in hope, but in acknowledgement. And I swear to God, I understood him. This wasn't about rescue. It was about whether we were brave enough to stay. It was Maya who opened the shed. There was no speech, no final deliberation, no looking back to ask for permission. She just rose from the porch as the first light crept through the charcoaled gums and walked toward Joan's yard with a towel under one arm and a soft carrier slung across her shoulder. The gate squealed in that tired, familiar way, and I followed, slowly, without needing to speak, because the air between us had already answered the question. Inside the shed, the remaining cats stirred as we entered. Not panic, just movement. Like they could smell the shift in us, sense the tension had finally given way to choice. One of them, a lean tabby with notched ears and a scabbed shoulder, watched Maya silently. Another backed away but didn't bolt. The last, a black one with a crooked tail and eyes like cold tea, hissed once and then stopped halfway, like even his defiance was worn out. Maya crouched and opened the carrier, laying the towel out slowly beside it. "I'm not asking you to trust me," she whispered. "I'm just giving you the option." And somehow, whether through exhaustion or understanding or some invisible pact passed down through Joan's hands, forward, not gracefully, not out of loyalty, just forward, into the carrier. Quiet, without drama. I carried the second. It fought more. Claws against denim, teeth flashing in panic, but I held on, not with force, with presence. I whispered like Maya did. I steadied my breath, and eventually, it stilled. We left the last one for a moment, gave it space. Joan's journal said he'd been the hardest. Feral from kittenhood, only comfortable when entirely unseen. We didn't push him. Sometimes rescue is knowing when to wait. By the time we returned home, the sun was above the ridge and the air had changed again. Lighter, cleaner, like the worst of the smoke had finally cleared. Captain greeted us with his usual chitter and flapped to the counter like he'd been timing everything. He mimicked the sound of the carrier door opening with uncanny accuracy, then let out a low whistle that made Maya smile despite herself. We placed the cats in the back room, windows open, food prepped, water fresh, and then finally sat, exhausted, changed. Neither of us said it outright, but we both felt it in our bones. We were no longer temporary. This wasn't just a stopgap or a good deed. It was our line in the sand. Later that night, I opened the journal again and found the final page. Blank, except for one short line at the bottom. "If you're reading this, then I've given them to you." It was not a burden, not a demand. It was a passing of trust, and we had accepted it, not because we were ready, but because they were. Rescue doesn't end at the moment you pull someone or something from danger. That's just where the noise stops. The real part, the messy, tender, terrifying part, comes after. When the adrenaline fades and the house is quiet again. When the carriers are set down. When the lives you've brought in begin to reshape yours in return. It's been just over 3 weeks now. Fern follows Maya from room to room like a thread of shadow stitched to her heels. She still startles at sudden sounds, but she no longer hides behind the couch. She sleeps curled beneath the bookshelf, purring low and slow like a motor winding down. Milo has started to eat again. Not much, and only if we leave the food in the corner of the room and don't look at him. But it's progress, the kind that doesn't make headlines or go viral, the kind that's quiet, earned. We never found the fourth cat, not fully. I caught a glimpse of him once near the burned fence, his body ghosting through the underbrush like smoke refusing to settle. I left food. He didn't take it the first night, but the next morning, it was gone. Maybe that's all he needed, the chance to choose us on his own terms. Joan never called again. We don't know if she's still in the evacuation center or if she was moved somewhere else. But her journal sits on our shelf now, beside the vet books Maya once studied in school. Some pages are still dog-eared. Some still smell like her house. Captain often flies over to sit beside it. He pecks gently at the corner like he's trying to open it again. Sometimes I wonder if we're doing the right thing, if we've taken on more than we can carry, if this was ever really ours to hold. But then I see Fern curled up next to Maya while she writes intake notes by hand, or hear Milo paw at the window at night just to watch the trees sway, and I realize it's not about being ready. It never was. It's about being willing, willing to make room, willing to stay when it's hard, willing to listen to something you can't explain, a feeling, a cry, a parrot's strange voice calling out in the dark. Because sometimes rescue doesn't look like flashing lights or heroic leaps. Sometimes it's a bird at a window, refusing to stop screaming until someone pays attention. And sometimes the one who alerts you to a life in danger, becomes the reason you decide to keep living yours a little more bravely. So if you've ever felt that tug, that pull to help, even when you don't know how, don't ignore it. Rescue isn't about saving everything, it's about saving something. Thank you for being here. If this story stayed with you, share it, tell someone, or just look a little closer the next time you hear a sound that doesn't quite fit. You might be the unlikely hero someone else is waiting for.